Alright, here's my new reloading press. This is a Forster CoAx press. It's got a lever that you swing 180 degrees like you do on most presses, and a part that goes up and down when you swing it like on most presses. But at that point most of the similarities end, and I'll get into the details now. If I had to pick a point of departure from other presses as opposed to this press, it would be this yoke-shaped operating lever. Every other press, pretty much, that I'm aware of, operates on one side or the other. And the operating lever is on one side or the other. But with the CoAx, it's dead in the center. The lever being split gives you equal operation on both sides of the press. And you notice also that there are two guiding rods instead of the one usual rod, and they're not actually in line or directly underneath the cartridge case, but they guide that moving platform right in here, and they're guided down at the bottom and again up at the top. So there's a great deal of things going on here to keep it concentric, but also when you put sideways forces on it, it has no effect, whereas on a lot of presses, if you put a little sideways force, it'll tend to rotate the ram, the main rod that pushes up against the cartridge. Well, that's not a good thing, so there's that. So the linkage is also got a great deal of compound leverage. A lot of presses do, and this one isn't a great deal more efficient than say an RCBS rock chucker, but it's a lot more efficient than some of the other presses they make and some of the small presses. And I'm telling you, you do when you get to be, you know, a senior citizen plus, and you operating this thing with a case sizing operation that takes a lot of effort, this thing just doesn't require any effort at all to size a case, and your shoulder and your wrist will thank you. One of the unique features on the CoAx press is the case holder jaws, which, as you can see here, open and close as the press is raised and lowered. At the bottom of the stroke they open and immediately close as the ram begins to move upward. And you just simply drop a case in there anywhere. It doesn't have to be right in the middle, and the jaws will grab it and hold it firmly. And not only that, but the case is free to float in either direction somewhat, and that allows it to align itself with the case holder. It really doesn't matter what you put in there, it's going to grab it. Here's a large rifle case. Here's another pistol case. Grabs it, holds it tight. Careful observers will notice that there are two sets of openings on the jaws. There are these large openings, and then on each end there are small openings. The jaws can be just simply flipped over under these plates, and you can cover about 95% of all cartridges out there with either the large or the small. Probably the most innovative feature on the press is the method by which it handles dies. Instead of threading the die into place, it simply slipped into this sliding groove and locates itself toward the rear. But at the same time, it's free to move back and forth. And remember, the case was free to move from side to side. So between the two floating objects, you have a self-centering system. Floating die, move it forward in the slot, and then when the case touches it, it pulls it back. Let's do that again. Watch the die. move to the rear, right there. And the case lines up with it. So you have a front to rear motion with the die for self-centering, and a left to right motion with the case to self-center. That slide in, slide out feature of the die also means that it's easy to change dies from one type to another. This is actually the ring that Forster supplies with the press. I give you a couple of them to use, and they work just great, but so did the ones I already had, including some of the smaller, that's an RCBS type ring, works perfectly. Here's some Hornady rings that I bought. They work just fine. They have the flats, even with the flats in there, they work just perfectly well. Even the O-ring style Lee dies, which I use this die constantly as a decapper, just works perfectly. Speaking of decapping, take a look at this. There's a 40 Smith & Wesson, and we'll run it up into a decapping die, and I hope you heard the primer fall out. Let's do one more, and I'll be quiet so you can hear the primer fall. Okay, big deal, you say. Well, actually it is a big deal, and let me show you why. The CoAx has a hole right here underneath the shell holder where the empty primer goes. So far that's not any different from any other press which would have a hole through the shell holder, but it's what happens after that that makes a difference. On the CoAx press, when the case goes up into the decapping die and we hear it fall through, it's communicating through a tube right here that goes up through that hole to the bottom of the shell holder. So the primer drops directly through that tube straight down into a cup which holds it. And that tube doesn't go into any of the critical parts of the press. Those shiny rods in the back that guide everything up and down and have a great deal of precision and a ground finish never ever get any of the priming compound on them, because it's all contained inside that tube which goes up to the shell holder. So the moving parts of the press, those critical parts, never ever get priming compound. And if you recall, primers contain ground glass, and ground glass and shiny ground steel rods just don't match together very well. One of the most critical aspects of hand loading and reloading is priming, and it's very, very important to get the primer seated properly. It needs to be about 4/1000ths below the rim of the case, below the head, and that will ensure that it's properly seated in the bottom of the primer cup so that it will ignite properly, and also that it's not too high so that you could get an accidental misfire. The priming system here is just absolutely superb. It looks a bit awkward at first and tempting to do this left-handed looking over a camera, but you just simply drop a primer into the cup, raise the press above the priming post, and insert your case and drop it back down, pressing forward. And you can push as hard as you want to, and it's not going to overseat the primer. You get a perfectly seated primer, and I hope, let's see if you can notice that you see a shadow around the rim of the primer cup, and if you look down in there, you see a shiny reflection on the far side of the rim indicating its depth. And just to prove what we've got going here, let's try this right here. Put that against it, run it down. Wait a minute, get myself situated here. Bring it down against the head of the case, and we got 5 thousandths below, which is absolutely perfect. Something in the 4 to 6 thousandths range is what you're shooting for. So you get a perfect seat. Now the reason for that is it's the post itself. It has a built-in stop. This spring-loaded part here comes exactly 4 to 5 thousandths below the center post, this outer ring, and so no matter how hard you press, the case is pushing against that outer ring and the post is pushing the primer in, and therefore it can't go anymore, and it gives you a perfect seat without having to have some incredible feel or magical touch to make it go right. You don't have to. You just simply push it in there as far as it will go, and that's it, and you'll never overstress the primer, and if it goes all the way, then you're gold. And I love this priming system. At first I thought it would be very awkward because of having to do these one at a time like that, and frankly, if I was looking for high volume with a handgun, I might go to a more automated setup like the RCBS bench priming system. But honestly, this is very, very fast, and it works very, very well. During the priming operation, you probably noticed these 3 jaws here on top that hold the case in place. And yes, once again, they've done away with the shell holder and created a universal system that will work with any cartridge. And you just simply adjust these with the 3 screws, and you get a perfect fit for your case. Slides right in there. The priming is done like so. And in order to do that, to set that up, the company provides you with a tool that has a large priming stud on one end and a small one on the other. To use it, you simply put the tool into place underneath and let it sit there, and then the cartridge case, you loosen these jaws, and I'm not going to do that because I've already got it set, but you just move the jaws out of the way and drop this down on top, hold it in place, bring the jaws up against it tightly, and tighten them up. That's all it takes. It takes 30 seconds to install it. Mounting the press is very straightforward. There are 4 nicely drilled mounting holes that are actually on a real pattern, unlike some presses which just have casting openings which vary, and all you can do is just draw a tracing around them. But these actually are on a nice little 4 square grid. However, the leverage is such on this press that really all you need is a C-clamp. You don't even need 2. Just one will do the trick. Hold it down very nicely. It doesn't rock off the table or anything, but you know, bolting it would be very nice for people who don't ever intend to move it. I, on the other hand, with many presses, like the idea of being able to move them back and forth. I was concerned that these long dies, like the Reading competition dies, would be a problem clearing, but as you can see, not so. Worked great.